So this video, we're going to create some cubes. We're going to start with the add cube tool, and then we'll go ahead and utilize box cutter later on in this video. But let's just get started. So I'm going to turn my grid back on so you guys can see it. We'll delete this thing. And the add cube tool is over here. If you hover over it, you get a little menu that says you can use Control Shift and Alt with this thing. We'll get into that in a second. Let's just quickly utilize it. We can click and drag, let go, and then move, and then click again. We can create a cube. Pretty simple, right? Now, little side note here, we can also create other things. So if we want to create a cylinder, we could do as such like this. If we hold shift, it will lock the aspect ratio, right? You can let go shift if you need to, and that'll work fine like that. You can also hold down Alt, and it'll start from the center, and you can hold Alt and Shift at the same time, which might be useful for you, right? And so let's go ahead and we'll play around with control here in a second, but this cylinder, you can see we have a vertex count up here, or vertices count. So we can change this if needed. If we want a higher detailed cylinder, perhaps we can do something like that. And that'll be beneficial to us. So all your other ones, of course, you can fool around with these and figure out how they work. But we're going to be doing add cube for now. And it has a couple options up here. Probably not going to play with depth, but you will more than likely use orientation sometimes. Basically, you're going to snap to surfaces, but if you want to snap up and down, like from the grid area, change it to default. Okay. It's a little bit misleading, but default is like global, basically. And so snap to, on the other hand, is geometry and default. We're going to get into that in a second. But if we were to create a cube real quick, we can hold control. You see the little circle pop up in there? It's kind of hard to see it, but uh, let me take this and change this real quick. Something like that. There you go. Okay, so you see the little circle, right? It's snapping to that corner. We hold control the whole time. We can snap to this edge down here at the bottom, and we can let go and click. Bam. There you go. Let's say we do that same thing over here. Try it one more time. Is it messed up? But anyways, if we hold down control the whole time, we can actually snap to this edge. So it'll be the same distance out. The only thing is it's not on the grid yet, but we want it on the grid because that's the best way to block things out when you're trying to create modular environments, right? And so we can do that. Let's go ahead and delete everything, and we'll turn on geometry. Instead of using geometry snapping, we'll use default snapping. Okay, if we hold control now, you'll see we snap every meter. Okay, so these little squares represent meters. Matter of fact, if you want to change that, you can. So instead of using 1, if you want to do every half meter, you can do 0.5. If you want to do every 10 centimeters, you can do 0.1, things like that, right? So we're going to use meter though, just for now. So set it back to 1. And you can see we're going to snap to meters. There's a little trick to this thing, all right? So if we drag out a section and we start bringing it up, um, when you're creating modular pieces anyways, generally speaking, a center alignment like this doesn't usually work out too well. Because if you have a, in this example, we have a 1 by 7 by 4 meter uh, shape here. So this is right in the center here, and it won't snap to the 1 meter increments. All right, a little bit of a problem. Okay, so it really likes to be done in twos, so by 2 meters maybe. That's why using a half meter might not work out too bad for you. But you can see that is now going to be at least on the grid in the vertical, but on the left to the right, it's still not in the right spot because we didn't go out to 8 meters, right? Not a huge ordeal. You can use these numbers if you wanted to, but you're gonna have to go, probably best way to do this with the machine tools add-on. Once you get the machine tools add-on, you can select something like a vertex in edit mode, hit Shift S, use the cursor pie menu for the options and machine tools, and you can set it to a vertex and hold Alt while doing this. It won't adopt the rotational value of that vertex. Okay, so we can reposition our origin points, and that's going to help us potentially when we're creating modular units. Now, let's have a little bit more fun with this. All right, so here's the thing: we know it's snapping to the grid. We have to hold control, right? That's annoying. If we just turn snapping on, so absolute grid snap, if you need it, absolute grid snap usually make sure everything goes to the grid. We don't have to keep holding control the whole time. It's a lot easier to use it this way, in my opinion. So you can just hold Alt to change in both directions, or you can hold Alt and Shift to change to lock the aspect ratio anyway. So you can do 2 meters like that if needed. It's already going to snap, so you don't have to worry about where it's gonna snap to. Alright, that's a lot of fun. Now it gets better. Ready for this? So if you're creating something that's kinda large and you know you want it a certain size, so you make it whatever size you need it, and later on you wanna detail this thing. If you don't have box cutter, no, if you have box cutter, you might just start cutting it up, but if you don't have box cutter, check this out. There's an add-on for Blender called Bool Tools that comes with it, or excuse me, we'll go to it real quick. Bool Tools, enable this add-on, okay, and then display as wireframe can be useful as well. Right? But what we're going to do is we're going to use this to create cutters, basically. So we can go ahead and set our scale down lower to maybe 0.1 if we want. It's still got snapping on, right? And under the edit menu, you'll find Bool Tools over here. Now they have shortcuts for these things. Control Shift B being another menu you can access. You can see usually your shortcuts are listed here: Shift, Control, Notepad plus, minus, all that fun stuff. But we're going to be doing brush, boolean, difference, and union. Okay. And so I don't have those assigned, so I'm going to use that top right menu instead. But we can easily do a shape like this. And then, once we create it, it selects it. So shift click the main shape, brush boolean difference. We can start using it, something like box cutter. So this is actually quite useful. Now, of course, box cutter has other features to it that you won't have available doing this method, but still quite useful as a workaround, right? So you can have fun with that one if you want to. All right. Now, this is great just for experimenting when you're doing architecture. So if you're wanting to change that back to a 1, you combo these kinds of things up with going into edit mode, and you can make some really cool, interesting shapes rather fast for buildings or whatever the case. So if you bevel two edges like this, you can hit C to clamp it, mouse wheel it up, change it to whatever number you need here. I'm going to use 16 segments, but could use less if you needed. All right. If you want to ever create like a ceiling section, turn absolute grid snapping on, right? And so if you were to move that up, you can snap it to every meter, whatever the case there. Some of these edges are interesting because you can actually GG twice and slide them back and then hold Alt and then slide them back forward if you wanted to extend things a little bit. I don't think these snap necessarily to the grid. Yeah, you see, it doesn't really snap to the grid though. So it's a little bit weird. Oh, maybe it does. Maybe I just missed it. I don't know. It's close, but it's not quite there. So we can grab these vertices, pull them back a little, maybe pull that up to there, pull that one down to there, maybe. Depends on how you want to arrange this structure, I guess. But whatever the case, if you want to make some cool structures, this is something you could do. Play around with it, do some bevels, some chamfers, whatever the case. You can end up with some interesting results real quick, playing with basic forms. So yeah, this little tool, although it doesn't seem like much, it certainly can help you create things rather interestingly, very fast. So I just grabbed everything, press X, and did a limited dissolve of 0.05, so it kind of cleans up some of the mesh here where we did those bevels. So with all that out of the way, hopefully, kind of excited to use this tool because you certainly can go ahead and start using it. Even though we had it snapping to the grid now, it still snaps to the corners, by the way. So you can still use this in this manner if you wanted to. You see? Except it's doing every meter. Maybe you don't need a meter there. Who knows? Maybe you want to change the grid size to 0.1. Utilize that for just a moment. You do half as well. A little bit harder to make these match. Maybe there's a gutter here, right? So we do that. Maybe inset it. Inset it again, hold control. Yeah, so we can create more or less a gutter or something like that. So we can start detailing, right? Okay, so that's a lot of fun. I'm going to turn snapping off for a second, set this back to 1. Let's go over to box cutter instead. All right, so box cutter by default, when you press the D key, you have a different menu. So let's go over that. Under display here on this drop down, you can set simple pie. I find this one to be extremely useful in combo with what's going on up here. Right now I have snapping on, but a lot of times this isn't on. You can turn this on, it'll use dots. If you turn this on, it uses grid. So you might toggle that on and off. Grid's quite good because, well, if you hold control real quick, mouse wheel up and down, you can see you can make it match our grid here. So we can start doing things like creating things. That's if we have nothing selected, but that's not the only way you can use it. So you can press D and you can use the make feature. So if you have an object selected, you can actually work right off of that shape, right? Almost the same way as we were doing with the add cube tool, but now we can just do it with box cutter. On top of that, as great as that is, let's say we want to find the center point between these two areas. Press J, creates an edge there. You'll see how this works out. So we can use the grid, which is nice. We can mouse wheel up and down to change the grid size. And we can also come up here and do it manually. So we can press 1 if we wanted, or reset it to its default value, or whatever the case here. We can also turn it off entirely if we wanted to. This is quite useful if you want to kind of go power user with it, because what ends up happening here is that Box Cutter does something that um, the Add Cube feature really should do, but it doesn't. And that is that the grid here has smaller grid sections, right? So if we set this to a grid size of 1, we already know it's going to match the grid, right, of our scene. And so if we hold Control and Shift, we can snap every 10 centimeters, like we should be able to do with the add cube tool, in my opinion. But so since we can do that with Box Cutter, you don't necessarily need to even see this grid. You can kind of understand what it's doing or how it's working potentially. The only problem you'll have is that if an object's origin point is not on the grid, it won't line up with anything else. So you want to make sure that's always correct. Now, the way this works out is that we could turn it off, like where we don't see it. We could just change this number to 0, and we'll only get the dots for it now as we're moving, which might be something you want to do, because if you hold Control and Shift, you can still kind of see what's happening here. But that's optional. You don't have to do that. You can just right click these and reset them if you mess them up. And we can also use a different type of grid if we want to use static. We get this one, which is also kind of interesting. All right, and so let's not use the grid. Let's use dots instead. And dots is fun because when you have a model selected, you can hold control and you can select like the center of the edge, the center of the face, and the corners. So if we're creating a cylinder instead of a cube, we can select that center section and draw it out, right? Bring it up. That simple, that easy, right? Now, by default, I think, let me try it again. Yeah, you got to hold Alt to mess the cylinder up, apparently. I think the cubes by default go the opposite. Oh, maybe not. So yeah, just hold Control and do that. Then you have to hit Alt to kind of switch it over to this one, right? If you want to go from that point. All right, just kind of figuring that out. Alt and Shift to make it behave like so. So it's very similar kind of setup, right? You Control click, drag it out as needed, and like such. And you can see this one's rotated for some reason. Wondering if I did that right. I think we might have nearest on. There's different options. There's all kinds of different options in Box Cutter. There's like a ton of them. So you can do alignments local or nearest edges. I thought I had nearest on, but yeah, apparently that worked out. So whatever the case, we can work with that if we needed to. We can't do like a Control and Shift clicking, unfortunately, but we can just draw from somewhere and hold Alt. Do a number like this, bring it up. You see it goes out in both directions unless you unselect Alt. And now you go through and do that. So I can grab this later, pull it forward, adjust it. Maybe we extrude it a little, scale it in this way, bring the whole thing down. All right, so we got something like that going now. All kinds of little fun adjustments we can make. So yeah, box cutter is extremely useful. And of course, you turn that grid back on and we want to do other methods. So like we want to do a subtraction. We just select it real quick and now we can go through here. And you see our origin point is not on the grid, so it doesn't line up to the grid necessarily. We could fix the origin point or just move the shape. Either of them should work. Actually, the origin point should be moved on this one to the center bottom, maybe, and then put back on the grid. And it should line up all the way to the ends of the grid. Anyways, Doesn't have necessarily have to. So when we hold control here, you see the grid doesn't line up to it exactly perfect. But we are going to use a 10 centimeter grid just by holding shift. And so if we want to cut the same kinds of cuts that we had on the other one, or similar anyways, we'll get a very similar result out of it like this. So we might need to hit E or E again to flip back and forth between these two. We could do bevels, click once. We could do bevels by grabbing each corner and middle mouse clicking it. This is going to use a weighted bevel, which is fine if you want to do that. I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to just hit B again, do all of them at the same time. Mouse wheel up if needed. You can also bevel like that. Okay. And of course, using hard ops, you can add a bevel at the very end of everything as well. You needed do that number. All right. So we can get some really nice looking shapes out of this super fast. So between the two different tools, I think you'll have a lot of fun. If you don't have hard ops yet or box cutter, definitely get them. They're still useful. I know a lot of people don't fully utilize them, but it certainly can be extremely effective for creating different kind of architectural shapes and hard surface objects and things like that. So definitely want to try it out, see what kind of results you can get going with it. And at some point, when you do turn this into a building that you're going to use in a game or whatever the case, there's two different methods you can approach doing buildings. You can try doing center aligned walls, like I taught in most of my modular series videos, but you can also just do a whole building within a footprint and then have the walls on the interior side cut inwards as well. And so when you want to do extensions to a building, you can certainly do that just by doing a new extension. So you might just, cut something here, for example. You can see that origin point's not lined up quite right. And so box cutter is a little bit actually harder in some ways to utilize than the make cube tool, which I still think is extremely effective. You see that one, no fault there, no problem. So I'd probably actually use make cube for most of these big blockouts, but when it starts to come into like detailing and using bevels and things, I probably would use box cutter. And so, yeah, there you go. So you want to add an extension to something, you can do that. You want to add a little bit of detail to it, perhaps you can do that as well. Manually adjust these later. And so, fun thing about um, Bool Tools is that it uses the exact solver when you do a Boolean, whereas the default settings for hard ops box cutter uses fast, right? Fast allows for more cuts, but exact allows you to do things that you normally wouldn't be able to do. So for something like this to be joined to this, usually you'd have to have them intersect just right. But when you use the solver, the exact solver, anyways, you do a brush Boolean union, for example. If I was to convert this to a mesh, the main shape there, and delete the little piece we had created there, a lot of times we have just kind of a perfect little setup here now. There might be some errors in it. You might have some here at the bottom, but this one actually worked out just fine. There's nothing here to fix really. We could dissolve that if we wanted. Um, dissolve that maybe. And go back to kind of optimizing it to a very basic Boolean income model. But yeah, so you see, you can combine shapes very fast with that exact solver anyways. The simpler the shape, the better of a time you'll have. Because if it's too complicated, you're going to have a lot of stuff to clean up or fix potentially. You don't always want to do that. You don't always want to combine everything either. But like this combined to this, might be a good idea, right? So we'll do that real quick. We'll see if we can mess this one up now. So the base shape here that we attached everything to is the main one that counts. So this should be the one here. I convert it to a mesh real quick. You can see we have the leftover cutter. One of the downsides of using Bool Tools is it doesn't automatically remove those cutters always. Sometimes it will actually remove all right there. So I forgot that little thing exists, but let's see what happened here with the wireframes. Yeah, you can see the bottom's messed up. An AX limited dissolve sometimes will fix things like that. So press A or go into edit mode, select everything with A, X, limit dissolve, type in 0.05. Sometimes it will fix things like that. It doesn't always fix it. AM merge by distance. you'll see we had two extra vertices hanging out somewhere that were next to each other. You could try bumping this up one time to a very low amount. You can see that went up way too high, maybe like 0.001. It got rid of an additional two vertices there as well. So maybe not fully optimized. The machine tools cleanup feature, which is usually 3, you can use that, and a lot of times it'll help clean things up as well. In this case, it doesn't have nothing to do because these went pretty much flawlessly. They don't usually go this easy, but when they do, just be happy that they do. And so / again and unisolate everything. Yeah, so we have different kind of little things going on here now. Convert this to a mesh. Oh, you know what? I don't know why I keep doing that. We could apply all, and it should have got rid of the cutters and on top of it. So yeah, we might do something like that. I don't think I had a bevel on this. If I did, I probably shouldn't have. Yeah, so it's going to be a lot easier to do a blend with this thing if I needed to. So we could snap this to the grid, move it, center it just right. Hopefully I got that right. I don't think I do. Looks off a little bit, huh? Whatever the case, I think it'll be all right. So if we just wanted something like this down here, perhaps on the back side, we could do the union. Okay, and we'll go ahead and select this and apply all. So that's now one solid piece. We shouldn't have anything going on the bottom because we kind of didn't have nothing down there to do. It should be all right here. You can see that's working out pretty well. So we can shade auto smooth now. All right, so yeah, you just keep going through the shape and making it more and more interesting, perhaps getting it to do what you want it to do. You create a cube here and snap it to the grid. You can. You have like a little column or a pillar or whatever. I don't know how it didn't go all the way up to that point, but it didn't. So let's try it again. Different angle, maybe. Oh, it's not quite on the grid, I think is the problem. Okay. It's slightly off somehow. I don't know why it would be. It shouldn't be. Let's see. It's just a little high here on this section. So yeah, sometimes things like that, you just press G and Z and hold control and snap it back to the grid. Don't overthink that too much. Otherwise it looks good. So we can go back and use that add cube tool. And do that again. And if I didn't make it to the bottom, I'll be okay because I'll just move it down and fix the pivot point, right? So that's down here at the bottom, perhaps, or maybe in the corner. You'll find out which shapes or which objects work better with it in the corner and in the center. In this case, I think the corner is a better way to go. Now, so yeah, that's pretty much blocking out in a nutshell, right? That's really what you're doing. You're creating cubes, creating basic shapes and cylinders. You're just adding things together, perhaps, to make them appear the way you need them to roughly appear. You can go back and detail this thing later on until you're absolutely happy with every little thing that's taking place. Like you want to do insets and stuff. Just another quick way of detailing, right? Maybe I don't want to inset all the way down here, so I can do like a K Z, right? I can use the knife tool to go up there, grab this whole section perhaps. And so you can do something like extrude manifold, Alt E, extrude manifold. And this will work in this particular case right here. So we can do little cutouts like that as well, right? So little weird things like that can take place. If you ever wanted to do something like, let's dissolve that edge in there, or AX limit dissolve. The only problem with limit dissolve is it does get rid of these little edges here. Sometimes I don't like that. So sometimes it's just better to dissolve things manually. But anyways, um, let's say I wanted to cut here, and I'm going to hit A twice. You can see it lines up to that edge now. So I can actually pick the increment here that I want to rotate. So like 120, I think it's 120 I want, and then we'll go back this way, and we'll try to hit another 120. Okay. Right. If I wanted to take this all the way through the shape, we could do a Boolean with a cube. But just as a side note, if you have the Machine Tools Deus Ex version, the paid version, Punch It comes with it. So you can use Punch It as well. It's just like Extrude Manifold, but it goes all the way through the mesh. All right. So you can do Punch It, hold Control, push it all the way through. Sometimes it won't be right. You'll have to hit W once or twice, and then usually it's good to go. And you just click and you're done. So you can punch all the way through a mesh like that very quick, very fast. We'll do some loop cuts and bridge edge loops here. You might have a back face hiding out underneath. So you just have to delete that face, that interior face anyways, and that's now cut out like so. If I want to do a square cut here, this is kind of hard to do actually, now that I think about it. But I could do like knife tool on Y, and then on X. I'm going to overextend it. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to hit Y again, cut to there. So I can dissolve that little vertex, grab this whole area, inset it. So hit I, inset, and then inset again and hold control. And maybe just let it go for a sec and do that number. So we can do some detail in that way as well. And because we might not really need these things later, we can just start dissolving them perhaps. This one we might need to keep though. Unfortunately, I think we got to keep that one. But it's not necessarily always needed. Sometimes you don't need those. And how it triangulates at the end of the day, if it looks fine, it looks fine. But sometimes Blender will force it to stay just because it has to be able to have certain edges. It has to have like at least one edge or something like that for certain areas. And these two here, we can select and we can go ahead and push them out like that. If we wanted to try beveling these later, we could do that. Probably be better to bevel all these at the same time. We could do that number. And also cursor select an area if you need to, and then just control X on that or X limit dissolve on that, as opposed to doing the um the whole geometry. Sometimes that works out much better. All right. Yeah, so we went a little bit past making cubes, but I thought you guys would enjoy something like this at least because it's super beneficial to understand these things and how like those basic cube shapes slowly get turned into, a more advanced looking geometry. Uh, Relatively simple, right? So you should have enjoyed that one, I think, right? The video. So if you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff, and I will check you out next time. All right, take care.